Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Living Mandala podcast. I'm really excited about the moon episode coming up with Rachel Ruth Tate and myself. We're going to discuss the moon, all of its nuances, its correspondences, and things like this. Stick around after the closing bell, and I'll share with you a few of my suggestions on where to look for the moon and its influence in and around your physical home environment. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and stick around again after the bell, and I'll add a few more comments. Thanks so much for listening to the Living Mandala podcast. You're listening to the Living Mandala podcast. My name is Ara. And the Living Mandala of the Planets podcast series continues. I'm joined today by Rachel Ruth Tate. The sun was so interesting. Now we move on to the moon, the other big main attraction there in the sky, the other luminary. Of course, the moon, has a real strong presence in the nighttime of our lives. It's a body that orbits the Earth. So instead of the Earth orbiting the sun, like we talked about last time, the moon orbits the Earth. And the moon is large enough for its gravity to actually affect the Earth. The tides, think about the tides, think about the real, if you lived in a coastal community, the tides are a very hot topic in terms of the ebb and flow of daily life. Of course, the moon, comes from Old English, Mona. There's some other European, Proto-Indo-European terms, Menon, mensis, month, minute. It basically it's all related to the verb measure. Okay, so menses that has a correlation to the female menstrual cycle, which is often linked up about a month, a 28 or so day cycle. The moon is also associated with lots and lots of fabulous goddesses of the wilderness and the hunt, including Artemis, Diana, the Roman equivalent. Their symbols are the moon, and they are often regarded as goddesses of the moon. The moon is, you'll get into it, kind of more feminine in nature. So tell us about the moon, Rachel.
Well, let me say, in terms of the moon's inclusion in our timekeeping, that was actually the influence of Queen Cleopatra on Caesar. She convinced him to change the months. There were 10. She's like, no, we need 12 because this is the length of time that times our natural cycles. So I think it's amazing how even a woman is responsible for this being part of our timekeeping regimen, because no matter how evident this is, right, the flow of waters or the cycle of menstruation or the full and new moon that sort of lights the sky, that very feminine, right? Part of that in my mind is because, look, the sun and the moon are both luminaries, but we have the sun associated with bright light, gold, white. We have the moon associated with darkness as well as that silver, right? Almost the inverse hues. I know you'll get into that. But the moon reflects the light of the sun. So she literally receives it and reflects it. And we can take that literal physical process and in astrology correspond that with the internal, the personal, the receptive, and the yin, to your point. So while the sun is our outer expressed form of self, the moon is the way we take in light and information, the personality and the tone and tenor of our internal environment and how we process information. There are also correspondences between the lunar, right, the moon, and the physical body. If we think of the sun like the soul, the moon like the body who receives the soul, we are the vessel, right, that carries this sort of infinite human incarnation. But that moon is something that times our shorter cycles. So every month there is more available energy, more of the sun's light, more activity in the evening during the full moon when the moon opposes the sun. And there is much less activity, much quieter time, sort of that lull of natural cycles during the new moon when the moon conjoins the sun, meaning no light reflected, and we get that monthly reset of cycles. So the moon, in terms of natal astrology, the emotional world, the inner environment, the intuitive, the received, the feminine, the mother, we have all these lunar archetypes which are already really evident and really, known in the Western world. And I find that fascinating and interesting to see how a lot of the feminine is already overlaid on the moon. It's called a she, right? In almost every bit of mythology, right? And then a lot of women want to feel with their partners like they hung the moon, right? This is such a female word, even though it's not something that we think of necessarily in that temporal sense.
Right. And it's overtly linked with the sign of Cancer. You had mentioned that the sun and the moon are the only two celestial bodies that are linked with each one sign, and the rest are linked with two. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So the moon corresponds with Cancer, and Cancer is the fourth sign in the zodiac. It is our cardinal water sign, ruled by the moon, and represented by the crab. And I love Cancer as a representation for the moon because it speaks to me a lot about the feminine experience. Cancer, the crab, for its life cycle, has to live both on land and in the water. And as women, you often have that life of a maiden, that life of a mother. You change as you physically become the bearer of life. And crabs must have their brood, right? And that's why they must come out in and out of the water to feed this brood and to feed themselves. Just like women's travels, journeys are oftentimes based on those rhythms of feeding the family and procreation as well. And when you think about cardinal water, directional water, water moving in a direction, a river is the most obvious, clear example of that on Earth. And if you'd like to find life on Earth, especially before modern technology, find you a fertile river valley. It literally brings to bear all of the life. It's the channel by which life comes through, right? We all come through a vaginal canal or, a woman's body in some way, hence the moon.
Very cool. Well, it is also linked with the third eye, the chakra correspondence. It's there with the sun. It's the union of the two in the third eye. Again, the illuminative chakra of the body. The metal correspondence is silver. You alluded to that earlier. If the sun is gold, the moon is silver. And then, again, not a stretch here. The day of the week is Monday, Moon Day. We are recording this on a moon day. So the color most worn on Monday is white. There are instances of pale blue as well, but white is really the color for Monday. In terms of the runes, gosh, there's so many to choose from that are overtly linked to the moon. I'll start with Isa. It's simply an up and down line. It is linked to the moon. It represents stillness and reflection, also ice. And so it's got that stillness and reflection quality. I'll mention, Dagaz, which is the Dagaz. Again, I don't know how the heck to pronounce the runes. It's like Old English. It's a bow tie shaped rune. It's linked specifically with the full moon and symbolizes a big turnover in life, just as the moon turns over from new to full, full to moon. There's also Ophalia, which is an X, and it has like a little hat on it. It's linked also with the full moon, indicating a radical breakup with old ways and separations. And finally, I'll leave you with Laguz. It's a rune that looks like a little bit like a divining rod. So it's an upright with a slightly slanted down point. And it's all about water. It's all about flow. It's that which conducts. And it's about awakening the lunar side of oneself, curiosity about what might be lingering below the surface, all moon-like themes. In terms of the tarot, the High Priestess is often linked with the moon. Again, that overtly feminine person or archetype is the word I'm trying to look for. Okay, in terms of a yoga pose or a yoga flow, what would you recommend?
There is the moon salutation. Like there is a sun salutation, there is a moon salutation, which has a little bit more complexity than the sun salutation. Requires lateral movement, right? So oftentimes the moon's cycle in the sky, speaking to, right, the sun's apparent path is an arc. The moon's apparent path is a wave, right? And so there is this additional dimension that the moon brings. It's almost like it can look like, if you photograph it over time, like this perfect wave and trough, right, as it moves through the sky. So that's one way to access the moon. But then also, in my mind, Uttanasana, which is the forward fold, accesses the moon as well. It's part of both the sun and moon salutations, this Uttanasana forward fold. But Cancer, the sign which the moon rules the chest, right? And Taurus, the sign in which the moon exalts, rules the neck. And the chest and the neck being both bowed down and pressed against. So in this forward fold, the chest is against the thighs, and the throat is released and relaxed. It's extended as the crown, instead of rising toward the sky, it falls toward the ground, and we are stretched in that regard. I love it as being the connection or the inverse of Tadasana almost, because it is the self folding onto the self as opposed to being presented to the world. So having the heart, that chest, those breasts, right, Cancer's correspondence is connected to the thighs. It's really nourishing. Another quality of the moon is that nourishment, that investment, that desire to protect. These are all mother sorts of words and archetypes. And so accessing a forward fold might make you feel a little bit more unto yourself, internal, and able to receive.
Cool. And I also know that when women are on their moon cycle, there's often an edit or an alternative offered, to have the moon version of poses, like kind of across the board, that keep the womb space from inverting, and keep the gravity working to your advantage, to keep the blood, going the direction it needs to go, which is down and out. So there's often also, speaking of the moon, there's like the sun version of a pose, and then often the moon version as well.
Yes, exactly. You want gravity working for you,
Right,
and not against you in that regard.
right. Now, in terms of the orbit vibration of the moon, of course, the moon orbits the Earth, which is orbiting the sun. And so there's this inherent relationship between those three bodies. The full illumination of the moon is a full moon, whereas a new moon is, I guess, conjunct with the sun, right? As opposed to opposing the sun.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing about the moon is that the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth. So the moon itself isn't also one of the spinning objects, one of the spinning plates. It's there is the far side of the moon, which always faces towards space, which is so interesting to me that it has this public side and this private side. Even the moon does. Even the moon has a private side.
Of course it would, though. When you think about it, it's our internal world. And as much as we want to make ourselves known, what happens inside the body, nobody else can physically experience what is inside the body.
Right. So I just think that's a cool way to think about it. And of course, there's the different phases of the moon, the full, the new, but then all of the waxing and waning, gibbous and crescent versions, the quarter moons, they all have their presentation to us here on the Earth. And each one, I don't know what moon phase you were, but I was born on a full moon eclipse, so then there's like the eclipse element with the sun and the moon. The sun can be eclipsed by the moon, and the moon can be eclipsed by the sun, or by the Earth, I guess, actually. And so there's also these other interesting relationships with regards to how we view the moon from Earth. In terms of a takeaway, an opportunity, a healing modality, a meditation, I guess you could you could moon your perineum, but that's not the advice today. I love down to put your crystals out in the full moonlight. This is a practice that I've been doing for many years and really like it. I often will put various crystals in water and then put that water, crystals in the water out in the full moonlight where they receive the direct rays. So it's kind of like sunning your crystals, but like by way of the moon, because it's still the sun's light, right? That is, shining down onto whatever you're charging up. But there is an effect of, kind of charging and recharging, these living crystals that, come out of the earth and that are, like the rock form of light, kind of. Crystals are so fascinating to me. You're nodding like you have something to add to this.
It is so perfect to me, this specific ritual, because the moon's two signs, its sign is Cancer, water sign. The other sign is Taurus, its sign of exaltation, which is fixed earth. And what is more fixed earth
Right.
than a crystal?
Right.
And putting it in the water is combining those two archetypes and creating a positive ritual around cleansing.
Right.
And there's always an energetic apex when we have this full moon and then a reset at the new moon. But there is no light from the moon with which to charge anything during a new moon. So I love the full moon crystal charging.
Yeah. Awesome. Very good. So that's the moon for you. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with Mercury. You're listening to the Living Mandala podcast. Hey there, it's me again. So, in considering where to think about how the moon manifests in your physical home environment, here are my suggestions. Think about your self-care routines. Do you have everything you need? Do you have a well-stocked first aid kit? Do you have enough ibuprofen in your medicine cabinet? What is your situation like in terms of those self-care routines that you may have in your life? What are your monthly routines? The moon is all about the monthly cycle. So ladies, is it time to reorganize your period supplies? I know this is silly, maybe to men or women who don't bleed anymore, but I'll tell you, it's so nice and lovely, and it makes your period so much better if everything is there, stocked, easy to grab, and well organized. Dare I say, make it pretty. So there's my suggestion there. Another thing to think about would be consider the textures in your life. So is your bathrobe soft enough? Is it worn out? Is it gross? Do we need to get a new bathrobe? What are your sheets like? What are your towels like? What are the different textures? What's the feeling associated with all of those things with your body? The moon, again, is all about nourishment and self-care, embodiment. Think about your yoga practice. Are you getting enough exercise? Are you stretching your muscles and your fascia enough? These things are very helpful for comfort and self-care. Think about those things. Another idea that's associated with the moon, that's very lunar, it's very rhythmic, it's very feminine, is consider the practice of fresh flowers in your house. Here at my house at 108, we have flowers almost in every room. I buy them every maybe 2 weeks or so. Through trial and error, I've found different kinds of flowers that last a couple of weeks. So it's not a very expensive habit, to be honest with you, but it's so inspiring and lovely and keeps things very soft, very feminine, very gentle. So those are my suggestions for things to think about in terms of how the moon, not really a planet, but the celestial body of the moon, how it shows up in your life, your house, your home, your daily life. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks so much again for listening to the Living Mandala podcast.